This changed Kurt Weill's career forever. After this time, he became known as someone who was able very successfully to effect a crossover from serious music to a more popular idiom. He wasn't literally a popular composer. He still had classical aspirations. He had the aspiration to reform opera from within. But nonetheless, it seems at that point that his move towards a more popular musical language was irreversible.
Not only did Weill and Brecht incorporate popular musical forms into their production, the piece also had a strong political agenda. Focusing on poverty, criminality, and the hypocrisy of the class and justice systems, the Threepenny Opera dealt with the struggles of the marginalized in order to critique the capitalist system.
In many ways, I think his whole generation was reacting against the long 19th century. They saw themselves as making a new beginning, that in a way they were anti-romantics. They used romantic means very often, but their basic stance was one of almost cynicism about the modern world. They were very critical of the modern world. And in their criticism of the modern world, they also wanted to get their message across.
Ja, mach nur einen Plan, sei nur ein großes Licht und mach dann noch einen zweiten Plan. Gehen tun sie beide nicht, denn für dieses Leben ist der Mensch nicht schlecht genug, doch sein höheres Streben ist ein schöner Zug.
He inspects the criminal underbelly of society. Things are rather tawdry. There are prostitutes, there are pimps. Later the Nazis would accuse him of embracing this whole milieu as if he were condoning it and supporting it. But I think in many ways Kurt Weill was a moralist who was very critical of modern society.
Und die einen sind im Dunkeln und die anderen sind im Licht und man sieht
It was his way of addressing that issue, being at once both critical and entertaining.
Yet the Nazis' perception of Weill as a corrupting influence upon the national character and their persecution of him as a prominent Jewish composer led him to flee Germany in 1933. He finally settled in New York City 2 years later, and over the next decade continued to work on compositions and productions that aimed to meld both popular and classical forms. He established himself in the American musical theatre, collaborating with esteemed writers Maxwell Anderson, Ira Gershwin, and Langston Hughes. Yet after his death in 1950, it was his early, more critically revered work that reached a new mainstream audience. Bondi University in Massachusetts staged a new English adaptation of the Threepenny Opera, starring Weill's widow Lotte Lenya and conducted by Leonard Bernstein. The show was a spectacular hit and included the translated song Mac the Knife, which would then become a standard in popular music.
This was the context in which people like Frank Sinatra and Bobby Darin, Satchmo, Louis Armstrong, etc., came out with their versions, as it were, riding on the coattails of this incredible smash hit on off-Broadway, but also generating further success for that production.
Just a jackknife has old Mac Heath, baby, and it keeps it out of sight. 2, 2, 3, 4. You know when that shark bites with his teeth, baby, scarlet billows start to spread. Fancy gloves, though, wears old Mac Heath, baby, so there's never a trace of red. Now let that thing get through on the side.
In a sense, although the individual songs of his works became popular in their own right, he very rarely actually wrote popular songs as such. They were always integrated into complete theatre pieces, but then managed to detach themselves in various ways and become well-known tunes in their own right, often so well known that people didn't even know that they were by Kurt Weill.
And Waits himself was unaware of Weill's work. Unlike the other artists here, he didn't get introduced to his music by a friend or stumble across it by chance. He only became conscious of Weill after friends and journalists assumed that the German composer must have been an inspiration for swordfish trombones.
Waits told me that people were coming up to him and saying, you know, that sounds really like Kurt Weill. You've obviously been listening to Kurt Weill. And he hadn't, or he claims that he hadn't really. I mean, there clearly were things on swordfish trombones that made people think of Kurt Weill. I'm not actually sure what they would be.
Apparently he made swordfish trombones before hearing Weill or before consciously being aware of Weill. But the first track, Underground, sounds like it's straight out of the Threepenny Opera. You've got this marching bass line. And you've got this minor key melody, which just modulates at the right time. They're alive, they're awake, while the rest of the world is asleep. That bit there is pure Kurt Weill. So if he hasn't been studying it, it's already in him. It's already in his blood.
Yet after the connection had been made, Waits decided to actively investigate Weill's canon. And while he was becoming obsessed with the music he was discovering, record producer Hal Wilner, who had specialized in unusual tribute albums, invited Waits to contribute to his new LP, Lost in the Stars, the music of Kurt Weill. Released in 1985, Waits' distinctive cover of the song What Keeps Mankind Alive highlighted the closeness of their musical vision.
That is where we first hear Waits doing that very snide, angry, bilious, European satirical music we've never really heard him do before. And then that becomes a very important part of what Waits is interested in.
You gentlemen who think you have a mission to purge us of the 7 deadly sins should first sort out the basic food position, then start your preaching. That's where it begins.
Maybe he felt that he had exhausted a certain kind of American sensibility, and he really wanted to explore this more European kind of avant-garde style.
It's not a faithful rendition, obviously. Tom Waits, like Weill, has aspirations to create his own sonic image of the piece, which he very much does, so it doesn't sound like Weill in that regard. He doesn't sing it like Macheath would have done, or in this particular case, as Mr. Peachum,